everyone. I am Monica Gilson, Marketing Events Manager for M3 Global Research. I'm joined by Tom Pugh, a Business Development Director for M3 based in our London office. Welcome to the first webinar of 3 we'll be hosting in our winter series. Thank you for joining us and for your interest in client list studies. We'll be taking questions at the end. You can submit them at any time during the webinar using the Q&A function, which you should see on the right in your webinar console. For any technical difficulties, please use the chat function also found on the right in your webinar console. In case you missed our September webinar, Gamification to Revification, that Tom also hosted, I'd like to share a few words about our speaker today. Tom Pugh joined M3 as a Business Development Director in 2017. He specializes in real-world data and innovation in online tracking. He has worked in international fieldwork since 2010, holding senior sales roles at major organizations while also fostering his entrepreneurship in setting up and subsequently selling an online media business. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Really pleased to be back. We're going to look at 4 different areas here that are really important surrounding feasibility. So what can you do up front for your market research project to work with your fieldwork agency to ensure you're giving them enough information at the start of the project so that the feasibility you get back is robust and you can reach the sample sizes you require. We're going to have a look at tactics your fieldwork agency can employ in field to ensure that the project is successful as possible. We're going to look at what challenges there lie within list recruitment today in 2019, and we're going to have a look at GDPR, which it won't surprise anyone on this call is a huge area that has had massive effect on list recruitment, what can and can't be done, and feasibility. So let's look at what can affect feasibility at the start of the process. The key for a lot of our clients, research agencies and management consultants, is what information they can provide at proposal phase. And lots of things here can affect the feasibility that they will receive back. So as an example, letting your fieldwork agency know what the source of the list is up front is hugely important. I'll give you some examples. We receive projects where the list is a sales rep list of doctors that the farmer salesperson has visited over the last 3, 6 months to a year. Compare that to a secondary data list, and we haven't got to name the providers of those. We all know who they are. There's a big difference in how we would treat those two different lists. A sales rep list, by definition, will potentially not be as accurate as a secondary data list, and without casting dispersions across, all salespeople. I've been one myself for a long time. Attention to detail isn't always fantastic, and any kind of errors in the list and the way it's compiled will obviously affect the match. But if you compare that to a secondary data list that comes from one of the big providers, that tends to be, extremely accurate. But then there are limitations surrounding what we can do and what we can't do with that list. As an example, we can match that list to our panel and we can recruit from there, but we typically can't custom recruit using the telephone. So there's big differences in terms of the source of the list, where they come from, and how that can affect feasibility. And obviously to look at is how big the list is. So I'm going to try and not contradict myself too much today, but as an example, I'm going to talk later about how a big list doesn't guarantee a great match and a great project. That being said, having a list of a good size is a good place to start. And the bigger the list, mathematically speaking, it's more likely to yield a bigger sample size. So knowing up front how big the list is really helpful to the fieldwork agency. Being able to talk about what data is available within that list is hugely important. You've got the MPI number, the ME number in the US. Is that going to be available? That's going to make for a much more effective list match. Likewise, you have the DCF number in Japan. Are these going to be appended to the data set we sent through? If they are, that's going to really help with a strong list match, a strong list recruit, and a big sample size. But on top of that, what else is going to be available? If they're not there, or we're in markets where that identifier doesn't exist, is the speciality going to be there? Are we going to have zip code and city? Are we going to have hospital and institution? What other data is going to be available so that when we match the list, we can be doubly sure that that the match is accurate, that we can give our client and the end client what they want. So again, the more relevant information that's available, the better feasibility you're going to get. And then finally, what is the IR within the list? Are we saying that everyone who qualifies or everyone that matches and is recruited is then going to go through the screen and qualify? Or are we looking at a 50% IR within the list, which is going to yield half the sample size of 100%? I know that might seem like a common sense point to make, but knowing that up front really affects feasibility. What your fieldwork agency will say is feasible, and what is then promised to the end client. So looking at best practice to maximise feasibility, for the first point, I can really kind of hear people shouting at the webinar as I say it. Where possible, the list should always be sent in advance. I know this isn't always feasible, but maybe this is something as an industry we should all look at every step between farmer agency and fieldwork agency and see if we can rectify. And if NDAs have to be signed, then so be it. But having that list up front, it's really important. Seeing it, matching it, deriving recruitment based on algorithm before a proposal's even gone out is great for the fieldwork agency, great for the agency, and it's really great for the farmer. It happens not very often, but maybe it's something we can look to improve. But where it is possible, it should definitely be done. Where it isn't possible, then accurate data surrounding the list size, any segments and quota, the specialty. These really do need to be sent to the proposal phase. I can tell you from experience, quoting on a list recruit to then get the screener and the questionnaire through upon commissioning, and there's loads of segments and quotas we weren't aware about. It's really disheartening, and it's not good news for anybody. So where you can't send the list, send as much information as you possibly can through to your fieldwork agency, and you'll expect back a much more comprehensive quote and robust feasibility. And there needs to be a real understanding between all parties at this stage that the better the quality of the list, the likely better the match. And I know that might sound like I'm stating the obvious, but it really does need to be said at every step. Every step in the process, we need to understand that. And if the list turns up and it's of a really poor quality, it's smaller than we thought, it's going to present challenges for absolutely everybody involved on the project. In terms of best practice don't with list recruitment. We've seen it creeping in recent times. The universe lists exist now where we'll get a list and we'll get told, well, don't worry, this is the whole universe of gastros in Germany. And one can only think that these lists exist to validate the research respondents. But essentially, these aren't a good idea. Your fieldwork agency should always be able to talk you through the verification of their panelists and how they ensure good quality data, and whether they're audited externally or they adhere to any external levels of certification. That's really how we should be validating respondents. A universe list being sent through, even if it's a fairly strong list, will always yield a worse match than 3 found. So really, it shouldn't be necessary, and essentially, you run the risk of really driving down feature sample sizes. Finally, facility lists are ever present on market research studies. They can be, extremely useful, and I completely understand why they're used by our clients. The challenges there that are worth addressing here is that, if I'm, Dr. Tom Pugh working at Hammersmith Hospital Monday and Tuesday, and that's what I'm on my fieldwork agency's panel as, and on Wednesday and Thursday I move into the city and I work at Charing Cross Hospital, and Charing Cross Hospital is on the facility list and Hammersmith isn't. I'm not going to qualify for that project, but actually I should do because I do work at Hammersmith Hospital. It's just not how I'm profiled. So essentially, facility lists are important, but doctors do work in multiple locations. They have different office settings, and that really needs to be taken into account. So how we potentially manage that as an industry in the future is of great interest. Moving on, in terms of other challenges that we have with fieldwork and with list matching, European naming conventions can be a huge issue with a huge challenge with list recruitment. So, our Spanish cousins in the EU, they have these beautiful four-part names where they incorporate their family name into the middle. That can create challenges for list matching. Is that name displayed on the panel exactly the same as it is on the client list? And if it's not, how do we reconcile that? How are we sure that that respondent is exactly who they say they are? I spoke earlier at the start of the presentation about typos being an issue, but stating the obvious, when we get a list through, if there are mistakes and errors in there, we want as cleaner automated match as possible up front, and that's the cleanest way of getting this done. Now, of course, flexibility from your fieldwork agency here is massively important. We're always very conscious that these webinars aren't a sales pitch for M3 services, but as an example of one of the tactics we will do here on a list study in some of the European markets is there'll be an automated match up front, but after that there'll be a local market linguist going through, and they will do a manual match to make sure that we rectify that. But we can't catch all typos, and that can cause an issue. So again, a clean match is really important. Name shortening is an interesting one, especially where the name shortened, the starting letter of the name differs. So, I might be, Dr. William Smith in Connecticut, but everyone calls me Bill, and the sales reps call me Bill for the last 10 years. And on his call sheet, he's got Bill Smith. And on the panel, I'm down as Dr. William Smith, so it's more formal. I mean, again, we would hope to catch that with the manual match, but it's not ideal. It's something we really have to bear in mind. Probably the most important point on this side is list fatigue, getting some context of how to list this is being used by the brand team at Pharma. It might be that we have a really strong match, and that strong match could yield really great feasibility, and then we get 2 weeks into the field and we find out that that same list is being used on 3 or 4 studies concurrently, or has been used a lot the last 6 months, and actually the physicians are just fatigued by the same research on the same drug, on the same product. So again, it's something we really have to bear in mind, and any context our clients can give us up front is extremely useful here. But I think that the key to all of this is there are lots of challenges with list recruitment projects, but for our clients, you need to look at your fieldwork agency to be as transparent as possible, and to, for every step of the process, give you an understanding of how they're going to get this achieved. In 2019, there's absolutely no reason why your fieldwork agency can't be tremendously transparent, especially in a post-GDPR world, and we'll come on to that shortly. But if I was a research agency client and I sent details of a list out, or even sent the client list out, feasibility came back, I'd want to know exactly how that maths had been derived, what the match rate was, where the completes were going to come from, what the time frame was, if the fieldwork agency is going to work with a panel partner, who the panel partner is, how many completes they're going to get. That transparency in a recruitment plan is incredibly important, and it's exactly the way we all need to be working, moving forwards. And then offering that flexible approach. Running a list recruit study in the US is very different to running one in Japan, and it's very different to running one in Spain. And actually just matching and then hoping for the best, really isn't the way to work. And best practice really is to take a look at things on a country-by-country basis. And the final point here on this slide is, and this is why I'm at pains to say I'm not trying to contradict myself from earlier, but remember, just because you have a big list doesn't always guarantee you're going to have an 100% match or a really amazing match. It's hard to put a number on it. We're always looking to grow our panels and engage our respondents, but there are those doctors out there that simply will never have time for market research. And that being the case, if your list is full of research ambivalent doctors, then of course it's extremely unfortunate. But that could ensure that you have, not so much a bad match, the match can be effectively feasibility. So yes, that's where we are with other challenges. But I'm not trying to be glass half full about this. There's plenty that we can be doing here. We just have to work together. So, tactics that really work. Spoiler alert on this slide. This isn't rocket science. A lot of this is just best practice, but it's important that we underline it and address it. This is the first time we're going to really talk about GDPR on this webinar, but much depends really on the permissions and the instructions the data controller provide when the list is issued. And I apologise for reading off the slide, but there's no more succinct way of putting that. The instructions should come when the list is delivered as to what we are allowed to do with it. And that is in line with, are we allowed to custom recruit from that list? Are we allowed to match it to our panel? Are we allowed to share that list? And I'll come on to that shortly with panel partners. But that's incredibly important. The permissions really govern what tactics can be employed. So if the instructions come through and say, look, this is a secondary data list, you can match it to your panel, you can contact these respondents, but you can't custom recruit, then automatically any form of telephone recruitment comes out of the question. It's something we can't do. It'd be breaching what we've been told. That being said, the absence of telephone is not so much the end of the world. The majority of complaints will come from your Fieldwork Partners online panel. In 2019, that is always going to be the case. These panelists are they're market research respondents. They've opted in, they've been verified. They know what the score is with market research. They know how it works and what's to be expected. Telephone recruitment can be effective, and I think it can be it's most effective if it's 4 waves a year, ATU, and the end client wants to talk to the same positions as much as possible every time. Then a bit of time with some pre-recruitment there can be a good idea because you're going to get the benefit on 4 waves. But typically, our clients want us out of the field in 2 to 3 weeks, and in that time, it's going to be the online panel that delivers. So, it's not rocket science, but a well-managed list with a really good match, really effective management of any panel partners that might be required to get the project achieved for a big sample size, assuming that's done GDPR compliantly, is the most effective to maximise your return. And I think a strong understanding of that will help a lot of hopefully people on this webinar. We get asked all the time about own capabilities and calling through lists, and of course it's something we've done, but trust me when I say the online approach is far more effective. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, it's really important we look at GDPR and how GDPR has really changed the landscape of list recruit studies. And I think the most important thing for us to do up front is to define who the data controller is, because that is so important on a list recruit study, and it really does differ from relationship to relationship. So the pharma company is the data controller in their relationship with their research agency or management consultant, who in return is the data processor. That same research agency or management consultancy is then the data controller in their relationship with their fieldwork agency, who in return becomes the data processor. And to go one step further, that fieldwork agency is now the data controller in their relationship with any of their panel partners, who are then the data processors. So it's quite nuanced, it's quite complex in that way. If you're a research agency, you are both the data controller and the data processor, depending on who you're interacting with. And it's really important for the next part of the webinar, where we're going to have a look at GDPR best practice. So this slide, I think, is, for me, by far and away the most important part of this presentation. I'm actually going to start from the bottom and work my way up. But the research agency is the data controller in their relationship with the fieldwork agency, who is the data processor. They have multiple responsibilities, and there is a legal requirement to only use data processors who can guarantee they're going to implement GDPR correctly and work within the requirements of the regulation and work within the instructions they've been provided up front by the data controller as to what they can and cannot do with the list. So, if I'm a data controller and I bring on board a data processor that doesn't do that, from a legal point of view, that isn't right for the data controller at all. And it's really important people understand this. And, it goes one step further that if the fieldwork agency want to bring on board a partner. So let's say they're doing some work in the UK and Fieldwork's been a bit slower than ideal, or it's particularly tough to recruit, or the list is a bit small, or you get the picture. What they need to do is they actually need to go back to the data controller and ask explicit permission to share that list further. And if they don't do that, then that's not in line with the GDPR requirements. So it's a really important point that transparency throughout is crucial, absolutely crucial. And a lack of transparency, is not a good thing for GDPR best practice and list recruitment. And as I said, at the top of the webinar, the list should be sent with accompanying instructions from the data controller at the outset as to what the purpose of the list is and how it can be shared. You really need to guide your data process as to what they can and can't do and make that very explicit. So in summary, in a post-GDPR industry, list studies remain very challenging, but we fully appreciate and understand why they're incredibly important to the end farmer client and to our research agency clients. And there are plenty of things we can be doing to ensure that that they run successfully and we maximise return. A lot of the tips we've said about the preparation for the project, getting a clean list to the research agency, providing as much information as possible, giving lots of context as to where the list has come from, how it's been used previously, whether there's plenty of studies already in field with that list, and what the quotas or sub-quotas or segments are going to be, and what the IR will be within that list. And the Fieldwork agency must really work within the GDPR instructions they're given. This is really crucial because essentially there's a lot of responsibility on the research agency, the data controller, to work with GDPR compliant partners. So I can't emphasise enough how much transparency and communication are really key to running a successful list recruit study that remains GDPR compliant. So that's it from my part of the presentation. I apologise up front for some of the audio problems we had at the outset. I'm going to hand back over to Monica now, who's going to talk you through upcoming webinars. But we've got a couple of questions to come in, so I'll have a look through them and answer them as we go. But if anyone's got any questions, now is the time to get on your keypad and ask them.
Great, thank you so much, Tom. As Tom mentioned while he goes through the questions, I wanted to let you know that we'll be hosting our next webinar in this winter series on the 19th of March to discuss using ISO certification as a framework to ensure global quality. At the end of this webinar, you'll be taken to a survey. We would greatly appreciate your feedback, especially suggestions for future webinars. We want to ensure that we cover topics that are important and interesting to you, and your insights are invaluable to us in that area. Tom, did we have some questions coming through?
We do. I'm actually sat with my my learned colleague Mo Rice, who's going to assist me in answering these.
Okay, we have two questions that have a similar theme here, which is around. So the first question is: we've heard different answers from different data collection partners on whether or not GDPR requires us to reveal the sponsor of the study. What is M3's position on this? So I'm assuming this is related directly to list studies. List studies, how M3 are treating them is there is a controller and processor at times. So ultimately, the owner of the list is the data controller. But what we do at M3 is you can split up tasks and then be a controller or a processor over those tasks. And when it comes to matching to our panel, if it's a panel match, then we see it that we are then controller of that data, so we don't need to actually say who the client is, because those respondents have an expectation that M3 are going to contact them. Therefore, we become data controller over our own respondents. We disregard the client list and we work with that sample. If there's further methods of recruitment that the client wants us to use, then we would have to say who the sponsor is, because there isn't that relationship between M3 and the respondent. But part of GDPR is that you can look at a sequence of events and split them up and be controller or processor over the different tasks within that sequence of events. So I hope that answers that question. There is another question that it's my understanding that client list studies require one that those who are on the list must specifically have opted in to being contacted for market research. Yes, that is correct. And again, when we're working with list matches, this is absolutely fine, because the respondents who we match to that are signed up to our panel and opted into market research have already given their consent, and our privacy policy covers how we process their data. And then the second part of that question was the client must be revealed at the source of the list recruitment, which the same applies to the answer to my first question. So it very much depends on what recruitment method you will be using. So if a client, for instance, wanted us to cold call, then yes, we do have to disclose who the source of the list is. I think that is all the questions we have. Oh no, there's one more. So do you want to answer this one about?
Yeah, so
the question is, what kind of identifiers are used to ensure an accurate match to EU?
Yeah, so I mean, it's slightly different to how we'd work in, like, the US is a dream to work in that way, because you know, with working with the AMA, it makes it far easier to match. And Japan with the DCF number, you know, again, is great. In Europe, I mean, these identifiers, they exist, but in a far less obvious way, and they're far less commonly used. And so typically it isn't really a direct comparison to how you work in the US and Japan. And for that reason, that's exactly why, you know, a list recruit and even the list match process tends to take longer, because it tends to be a lot more of a manual and skilled approach as opposed to just matching the MPI-ME numbers. So I guess there are some identifiers out there. They're not commonly used. They're very rarely appended to the list that we receive. So typically it's about, you know, without using a horrible cliche, it's about thinking outside the box to maximise the list match and the sample size that we can provide. So I hope that answers that query. So I think that's all the questions we have, and thank you to everyone that asked the question. It's these sessions are always great when it's interactive and collaborative. I mean, what I would say for those people that think of questions afterwards, or, you know, just didn't want to ask a question on the webinar, or in general just want to have a conversation about list recruitment, my contact details are on the screen now. I always pick up my mobile cell phone unless I'm in a meeting or presenting a webinar. So please do call me on that or send me an email, and I'll be only too happy to help in any way I can. And if it's not me that can help, there'll be somebody here that can for sure. So thank you so much for attending, and I'll hand back on to Monica to close this out.
Great, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mo, for joining on the questions. And also, in addition to our webinar program, if you have questions for our marketing team, please email us at marketing@usa.m3.com and we'll get back to you. In a few days, we'll be sharing the full audio and video version of this webinar, including a copy of the presentation. And you'll also be able to find this webinar and any previous webinars you may have missed in the resources section of our website. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to host you again on the 19th of March.